So let's get into the Dragon Slayer folktale. Let's take a look at what that one's really about. This is a really timeless one. It's really fascinating. The Dragon Slayer folktale is the ATU 300 folktale. It's found all over the world. We'll get into some of the more details there. So let's get into what exactly this story is, and then I'm going to tell you about what this story really means for our development. And this is a timeless story. The implications of this folktale are relevant right now, even today, and it's just absolutely fascinating. So let's get into it. In this story, a young boy, or a youthful male anyway, acquires 3 magical dogs. Then he goes to a town where people are mourning and learns that once a year a dragon, sometimes that has 7 heads, demands a virgin as a sacrifice every year. This year, however, the one that he happens to arrive in, the princess has been chosen, and the king offers her hand to anyone who can rescue her. So our bold young hero goes to fight the dragon, but he fails and falls into a magical sleep. The princess, however, twists a ring, or sometimes it's a ribbon, into his hair and awakens him with a single tear. After this, he charges off to go fight the dragon with his magical dogs still with him. He does manage to defeat the dragon and cut off the heads, and then he takes either the tongues or the teeth. It depends on which version of the story you're looking at. And then he's gone. While this is happening, an imposter comes forth and demands the princess to marry him. He says he's the one who defeated the dragon, and he claims her. The princess, however, convinces her father to delay the wedding, and a certain amount of time passes, depending on which version of the story you're looking at. Just as the princess is about to marry the imposter, at the last moment, the dragon slayer arrives dramatically. The way he gets into this wedding party is to use his magical dogs to get him food from the table, and then he brings it in as if it were his gift. There's variations on how this works, but in any case, he winds up figuring out how to get into the party, whereupon he's able to provide the tongues or the teeth and say, no, look, I am the true dragon slayer. And then he wins the princess, and the imposter executed. So that's the story. The variations of the story are found all over Europe. They're found in Russia, in the Eastern European countries, the Near East. There's versions in India, China, Japan, Canada. There's Native American versions of this story. And you can find them all over Africa as well. So pretty much everywhere. So what is the story really about? Now, as I've mentioned on other videos where I get into the version of fantasy fiction that's fascinating me, in this instance being folk tales, our oldest form of fantasy fiction, the story here contains, because it's a folk tale, it is absolutely concentrated archetypal material. And the reason why this happens in the form of folk tales is because they are the end result of generations and generations and generations of oral storytelling. And that can't happen without all of the stuff that doesn't really resonate or match our most common inner dynamics being eliminated from them. And so the only thing left is this very concentrated symbolic story about things that happen to us in a very general sense, and it's this very universal sense. But even still, they're still quite detailed, which is really interesting about this. So this story is about masculine and feminine development. The protagonists are both at a time in their lives when they're just about to pair bond and form new life and go into the next generation and become parents and all that stuff. So it's about that phase of life. And there's a lot of detail about how this works. Now, classically, the way that Jungians tend to look at folktales is, if there's a masculine or a feminine, it's not just about men and women. It's about those two particular forms of energy developing within every person. And some people will have more one versus the other, and it doesn't necessarily line up with their gender or their sexual orientation or any of that kind of thing. Because that's not quite as important here as the fact that there are two versions of this kind of energy, the masculine and the feminine, and they operate on basically different rules, but they complement each other in the ideal case. Now, they sometimes conflict with each other too. So, but let's look at both sides of this and see how they work together. Now, I think it's really interesting because the Dragon Slayer story often focuses almost entirely on the hero and his heroic efforts to destroy the dragon, and the princess is just kind of waiting around for him to rescue her. That's so commonly thought of as the Dragon Slayer story that I think in terms of like modern discussions of folktales, there's this tendency to look at the folktale and say, well, it's kind of skewed towards men or males and the warrior and all that kind of jazz. But that's not actually the case when you look at the real folktale here. Just the one that I described here has all kinds of stuff that the princess is doing, and her efforts are absolutely critical here. So the first part we'll get into is the fact that the young hero has these three magical dogs. Now, what is that all about? So again, you look at folktales as you would interpret a dream. And being able to interact with animals that are on your side and working kind of in tandem with you is a way that the psyche will symbolize a connection with the ego, with the person's instincts. So if I'm in good relation to the instincts, then I'll have very positive interactions with the animals. And if they're at odds with each other, then they'll be fighting with each other. And very many folktales deal with this subject matter. And the Dragon Slayer is no exception. Now, what about the dragon itself? So the dragon we got to figure out what that dragon is symbolizing, we need to look at what it's doing. And it is a destructive inner force that is devouring potential life, right? So it's demanding virgins. Like, why virgins? Like, what's so special about that? Well, it's because a virgin is a great way to represent untapped potential or unrealized potential for new life and abundance. And so the dragon is destroying that. So that's a great way to depict a complex, a very primitive and devastating complex in particular, right? Because it's a dragon, right? Dragons are extremely intimidating and powerful, and they combine air and land and reptile and bird. And well, birds are reptiles, but you get the idea. It's a very powerful symbol. In alchemy, it becomes a symbol very important to the end of the alchemical process at the end of life too. But that's the subject for another video. In this case, it's about the ego versus the dragon. And the dragon is representing a complex that is very destructive. And it could be imposter syndrome. It could be inferiority complex. It could even be an ego complex, one that's any of those things can easily do what the dragon is doing right here, which is destroying your ability to move on and create new life, to enjoy life, to fulfill your potential and all that kind of thing. And now what's going on here is that in this particular instance, he just happens to walk in when it's threatening now the princess. So the princess is a new player into this drama, and she represents the young feminine symbol, right? So this is the young female ego now who is being placed into this predicament. And you can look, and von Franz does this a lot, you can look at these from both points of view, and that makes a whole lot of sense. So I can view this story as if I were a young masculine ego and say, well, what do I need to do in order to connect with the feminine? But I can also look at it the other way around and say, as the feminine, how do I connect with the masculine? So now, in this case, the feminine is also under threat by this dragon. So this is a good picture of a destructive complex that's threatening her development as well. Now, in this story here, we have two essential modes of operation. In the masculine development, this is not just for the Dragon Slayer folktale, but it's very common throughout all kinds of folktales and a lot of different cultural mores and everything else, in the sense that the masculine involves striving for proving your worth to others. In other words, the masculine way of attacking the world and navigating the challenges of the world is to seek value from others through physical action. The feminine version of this, however, involves in looking inward and finding the strength and empowerment and value of oneself. So rather than seeking value from others, the feminine has to look and find value in oneself and gain value from within in order to assert oneself and become successful. So both of those things are, of course, very important to all of us, really. But it's interesting that it divides these into these two avenues. Okay, and I think the reason for that is, again, it's the psyche using concrete images to depict complex, and very nuanced subject matter, and it's a way of helping us understand them. Okay, so now in the next step here, the hero runs off to go fight the dragon, but he completely fails. In fact, he becomes unconscious. He loses track of himself. So the complex beats him here. So that's teaching us something here, right? You can't just attack complexes. It doesn't work. He falls unconscious, and only the feminine principle is able to revive him, bring him back into awareness, awakening him. And it's very important to notice how she does it. Okay, it's not just alakazam. There's specific things that she does. Like, and again, when you're looking at dreams, you always want to keep in mind, like, there's a reason for this particular imagery expressed the way it is, and it's because if it were different, it would be a different thing that it would be symbolizing, right? So in this case, she does it two different ways. One is she twists a ribbon or a ring into his hair, and rings and ribbons are things that bind together things, so people to each other, and particularly with the rings, and into his hair, right? So not just anywhere, but into the hair, right? So the hair is often a symbol of the ego, extension of the ego, attention to beauty, but also age, the aging process in terms of coming into one's own, that kind of aging, not old age. And also the tear. Okay, this is one you see in a lot of folk tales too, where the princess cries a single tear on the male character who's often unconscious. You see this in Rapunzel, for example, and that awakens him or brings him back to life or whatever it is. So what's that all about? Well, in order to figure that out, you just got to look at the imagery itself, right? Stick to the image. A tear is an outward, concrete, physical expression of emotion. So through the princess's ability to express her emotions, something that males tend to struggle with, it brings him back to life. So she's imparting her strength to him in this moment, giving him her strength from the feminine perspective, not to go out and beat people up or fight dragons and all that kind of stuff, but equally important, which is bringing awareness and emotional connection, is what she's imparting to him. So only then, of course, then the hero can go charge off and fight the dragon. He's got dogs with him, but he's empowered by the princess here. And then I think it's very telling that only then does he actually defeat the dragon. When he defeats the dragon, he does it in a specific way. He cuts off the heads or the tongues. So the head and the tongue is the complex neutralized. Now, it can't take over the ego because it doesn't have a head anymore. And can't use the voice because it doesn't have a tongue anymore, right? So it doesn't just stab it in the heart, right? That would have a different meaning. It cuts the head off. And it's funny that that's so often what is the case. Okay, well, not really funny, because we all kind of know what's going on there. Now, in the meantime, someone else shows up and claims her falsely. Okay, so this is another complex that shows up here, an alternative ego, or an alternative, like a negative animus figure. And it's one of a character who is full of lies. He is falsely claiming his external validation and value that he is supposed to have won fair and square, like the hero did. And it's all about greed. He's trying to abuse her. He's trying to use her, right? Things many women have run into in life. Apparently, that's nothing new. But she, of course, has promised herself to the hero at this point by going through all the effort of bringing him back to life and tying a ribbon into his hair and all that sort of stuff. But society and convention are closing in on her, demanding obligation. Now, it is, I think, very telling that is the challenge that she faced. Okay, this is her dragon. Okay, so whereas the young male has to go out and fight an external threat, a monster, a demon, or whatever it is, the feminine has to face an internal threat. So that's within the social group. Her goal is not to defend the border from monsters from the outside. Her goal is to navigate the challenging, complex inner workings of the inner environment that she's in. And it's threatening her autonomy. It's threatening her happiness. So what does she do, right? She doesn't just lay there and do nothing. She actually convinces her father to delay the wedding, right? So that's as equally of a heroic and impactful event as fighting the dragon is. Maybe it's not as flashy or as dramatic to some, but notice how powerful it works in the end. It's absolutely critical. So then she does this and then waits patiently. She navigates the social environment, not with physical force, but with social force. She's reading the social cues. She's using her empathy and her emotional intelligence to accomplish this goal. Again, it's subtle. It's not in your face like what the masculine character is doing. They're the ones that get all the attention, and I think is probably one of the reasons why we have a tendency to look at this in a very kind of sexist skewed manner. We look at what the hero's doing and we'll go, wow, but we're missing this huge detail here in this folktale. Okay, so at this point now, the hero, however, has figured out a little bit of the princess's savvy. So he doesn't go charging in there, but because then the king's men would just grab him and throw him in the dungeon or something like that, right? So no. He uses his trusty dogs, those instincts that he's mastered, to insinuate his way into the party. And that's, I think, a direct way of showing that he has learned the lessons that the feminine have shown him, and that he doesn't have to go charging in there with muscles flexed and all that kind of stuff. So then he has proven himself to be the true dragon slayer because he has the tongues or the teeth or whatever it is, and they both win. And of course, the imposter is eliminated. So what's really all this about then? I think the Dragon Slayer is about successfully navigating young adult life. It's a universal challenge we all have to face at some point. And it involves with dealing complexes both from the masculine and the feminine perspectives. And a full reading of this, paying attention to what the princess character is doing here, shows us that it is every bit as much about feminine strength as it is about masculine strength. The princess is not a passive character here. That's a stereotype, and that's a misconception, I think. It's a misreading of this folktale. Without her, the hero would be completely useless. Okay, but she needs him too, of course. She doesn't do the same stuff that he does. She doesn't run out there and fight dragons. Why would she? Okay, so whereas I think many times maybe well-meaning storytellers now are looking at these kind of archetypal stories and saying, well, let's empower the feminine. Let's let her run out there and do the stuff that the masculine character typically does. I'm not opposed to feminine empowerment, of course. I think it's a worthy goal, but I think it might be missing the point here. If you're deliberately or unintentionally missing the active role that the princess actually has in this case, then you miss an important dimension of this storytelling style. And I think ultimately what you see is that the folktale itself, while it's not perfectly balanced, of course, it is at least quite a bit more balanced than you might think at first blush. It speaks to the masculine and the feminine energies within all of us and shows us how they should work together to achieve life and freedom. So that's what I got for you today. See you next time.